It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders Podcast.
Here we go.
Here's Jim Meehan and Richard Fox.
Good Monday morning. Welcome back to the Zags Basketball Insiders Podcast. Jim Meehan with the Spokesman Review. I can get that out. Richard Fox, TV analyst on Gonzaga basketball games, KHQ, SWX, Root. And Foxy, we're back from paradise. The Bahamas is one of the most unique locales for a tournament there is. Never disappoints, and didn't this time. As far as the Zags, 2-1. That's the same thing they've done the last two trips there. Different finish. They finished fifth because they lost their opener. The times before, they lost in the title game to Michigan, finished second, and then 2-1, finished third. So they've lost in each round of the three in the Bahamas. But 2-1 this time around. We'll go through every game. We'll go through the game ahead, which is a monster game, Kentucky, at Climate Pledge in Seattle. But first, the net rankings came out this morning. The Zags debuted at 3. And I just got done writing up an article about it. You may recall that angst a year ago, and they had no quad one victories until Kentucky, I think on February 10th. Mm-hmm. They were pretty much outside the bubble, through January and into early February. And then that win kind of launched them on their way, and they got all the way to a 5 seed. Foxy, I'm going to ask you about the net, but I got to ask you about Thanksgiving. What'd you do? How'd it go? And I assume you had your eyeballs on the Zags at some point Thursday when they played Indiana.
Well, my much better half, Colleen, knocked it out of the park. We had a great Thanksgiving day with her family and just had a really nice time, good food, and lots of sports on television. She indulged my brother-in-law and I, and let us have kind of sports on throughout the day. So yeah, we watched the Zags, ate too much, probably had one nightcap too many, and it was a good day. But it was a good long weekend either way. And yeah, we watched all 3 games as you know, and several others. I thought the Maui Invitational was awfully interesting too.
You bet. We gathered for dinner at a place called Anthony's, a little bit away from the Atlantis Resort. We had the entire Spokesman-Review team that was down there, girlfriends, wives, and there's a picture of it somewhere. And my wife got the traditional Thanksgiving dinner. And as we do almost every time we go out to eat, I got something different so we could mix and match. Chicken marsala on Thanksgiving night. So not traditional, but not bad. We did okay down there. So nice. Hey, Foxy, let's do the net here. That is a big deal when it comes to seeding, sorting, kind of evaluating NCAA teams that the NCAA uses. The Zags were 6-1 at this point last year. They would get to 7-1 a few days later when they were 31st in that first net rankings. And like I mentioned, with those quad one wins, they were hard to come by till the end of the year for the Zags. Where they're positioned now, what they have done, I think the quality of their wins gives them a lot more leeway to absorb a loss here or two going forth. What do you make a number 3? But there's some numbers there now. I think UConn's 39th after going 0-3 in Maui. Indiana 71, I believe. Not a big deal yet, but certainly a better position for the Zags.
Yeah, I mean, it's not difficult to recall the stress level last year of just seeing kind of Gonzaga not only struggling in the net, but not really having a whole lot of opportunities in their schedule last year, particularly after we got through the holidays, and how important that Kentucky game was and how that loomed so large. It really felt like their one opportunity to, lock up or at least, create some cushion for their season. I don't think we're not going to have any of that this year. I mean, certainly the schedule, the way it's dialed in this year, this group is better than the team they had last year. I think probably by a wide margin. Um, so I'd expect to see Gonzaga in that top 10, if not the top five, throughout the course of the year, barring something really unimaginable at this point.
Yeah, and I mean the only way it probably goes south in a hurry is you lose to those big games you've got coming up: Kentucky, UConn, UCLA. And then that odd quad two loss, excuse me, or maybe something in conference that you wouldn't see outside of St. Mary's. That's probably the only way. I would think it could get a little dicey, and I just don't think this team has that in them. I think they're going to hold up very well against these power teams that they're coming up against. By the way, Zags are number 7 in the AP poll. Dropped 4 spots after going 2-1 down there. I think that's probably about right. They finished 5th. Indiana win was good, very good bounce back win, but I think Indiana and Arizona and the rest of the ranked teams in Atlantis did not have the days they wanted. Still a number 1 seed in the last brackets I saw. I think there'll be a new round coming out tomorrow from Joe Lunardi of ESPN. Interesting, Arizona is a 6 now, and UConn was a 5 in the one I looked at. So a lot of up and downs on those that that'll change, fluctuate every week from here on out, especially when you get into conference and those Power 5 teams start, falling to teams in the middle or bottom of their conference, because their top to bottom is very good in those leagues. So let's go to Atlantis. You want to go, Foxy, to
Let's do it.
Atlantis?
Let's do it.
You missed the flight, but we'll catch up right here. West Virginia opener. Tough game, back and forth, physical team, outstanding guard Javon Small, transfer from Oklahoma State. Zags were not at their best, certainly not at either end of the floor, and I think offensively, for the first time this year, could maybe say was a real sticking point for them. And they're up 5 still, despite all that, up 5 in the final 30 seconds. They give up a long 3 to DeVries, the coach's son, and then a costly turnover near hit midcourt. Ball gets swiped from Nolan Hickman, 2 free throws. Caleb Battle, they designed a play, kind of a give and go. He inbounded it, got it back, raced down the floor, but I thought he was a little out of control and wasn't going to get the call that way. Goes to overtime. West Virginia made way more plays than Gonzaga in overtime. Pulled away, win by 8. Huge win for them. They went on and played well the rest of the tournament and fell to Oklahoma. Or not fell to Oklahoma, but went on to play well in that tournament. They've got a nice team. They're physical. They've got a big that shot it well against the Zags that had not been doing that. I guess the way it went down at the end, execution in close games is paramount, and the Zags didn't have it that day.
No, obviously the issue with subbing out Ryan and then not being able to bring him back on the floor, I didn't know that rule, to be honest with you. That results in Battle having the ball, and I think you're right, just out of control, hoping to kind of get bailed out by just going downhill, and to not get a shot off there in the regulation with plenty of time to get a shot was pretty disappointing. And then you go 2 of 10 and 0 from the field and 0 for in overtime from the 3-point line. You can't make shots, and I think West Virginia they had so much confidence at that point in the game. And Gonzaga's bigs, quite frankly, other than Huff, Huff was obviously solid, in 30 minutes, 19 points, really efficient, 9 of 14. But the rest of the group, Ike, Ajayi, and Greg, just really ineffective. Inefficient, that's probably the right word. Only 4 of 15 from the field. They got to the line 14 times, made 12 of those free throws. So their numbers, I think 19 points combined, but just didn't really feel like the impact was there that you normally see for Gonzaga up front. And even for Braden, as much as he scored the ball, in 30 minutes, only 2 rebounds. And I think that's a theme. Right now, I think he's averaging a rebound every 5+ minutes on the floor. That's not a good number for a center. By comparison, I think Ike is getting a rebound every 3.5 minutes he's on the floor. when that's where you're parked around the rim as much as both those guys are, you want to see that rebound rate per minute be higher than 5.5. And
Yeah.
so just not quite the game that you wanted to see. We saw Graham, we saw it again against Indiana, but the issues Graham's having with fouls early in these games, and not just within the first 5 minutes, but first 60, 90, 120
Yeah.
seconds, he's picking up a second foul. And you don't expect to see that from a guy who's been playing college basketball, A, for as long as he's been playing, but
Yeah.
B, a guy as good as him. And this staff is talking to him about it, even if you give up two early because you don't want to pick up a foul, that's okay.
Yeah.
And it makes it really difficult as a player to get into a rhythm in a game when you're out there, you're warmed up, lathered, ready to play, and all of a sudden, bang, bang, now I've got to go sit down for what might be 10 or 12 game minutes, but it's probably closer to 30 minutes in real time. That's difficult. So I thought West Virginia played a little bit outside themselves, although they are a good team. Small's the real deal. DeVries is a really good college player. Presents some matchup issues, and he shoots it so well that for a team like Gonzaga that's got real size around the basket, he forces whoever guarding him he stretches them out. And they shot a pretty good percentage, particularly in that first half, but obviously. 3 of 5 from the field, but got to the line 10 times. As part of that's Gonzaga's foul in there towards the end. But
Yeah.
it's not the loss I was expecting if they were going to have one there in the Bahamas. But part of college basketball today is you really don't know what these teams are with how
That's
many
exactly right.
transfers. Right? I mean, there's so much turnover on these rosters year over year. You couple that with a new coach, and it's hard to know how good is West Virginia. Well, they certainly proved, I think, down there in Atlantis that they're a good team, and they're going to, I don't think they're winning the Big 12, but they're going to be certainly a tournament team. And Indiana, we'll talk about them here momentarily. That's the other side of that coin. You bring in a bunch of three key players, and it doesn't fit, and now you're searching for an identity. West Virginia's got an identity even with all these new guys.
No, and you're dead on, because like the teams that had success there, Louisville, 13 new transfers, 13 guys left. Oklahoma, look at their roster. It's primarily new guys. And they got
we'll talk about Kentucky. Kentucky's all new guys too.
Same. Yeah, a lot of teams are. If they're not all new, they're 70% new. And so you don't know. If you watch the games, you watch West Virginia, you watch Louisville, you watch Oklahoma, you would have thought they're the ranked teams, and along with Gonzaga. Those were the four teams that kind of stood out. And it's just so many transfers, so much experience. Yeah, you've got to piece them all together and fit your system and do all those things. But the talent is there, and these are grown men. These are 23, 22-year-old guys who've played 100 college games, and that's exactly what Louisville had in West Virginia. And so it is hard to get a gauge on teams. It'll be interesting to see how those teams come along the rest of the year. If Louisville is a team at the end of the year, if West Virginia is, Indiana, I'm kind of wondering what they've got. But, one other thing I would touch on against West Virginia, and this is that age-old criticism of Gonzaga when they play physical teams like that, athletic teams like that. Sometimes they don't hold up. And if you go back to their last losses in the NCAA tournaments, the Arkansas loss, Purdue was a different animal with Zach Edey, just a monster back there. But Arkansas was the one a lot of teams will point to, and they've had others, but they've won their share of those games as well, probably more than not. But I think that rap kind of hangs with them until they break that door down and win a title, or do it over a Baylor, like in the title game way back. So athletic and physical, the guards. Is that a valid point, or is that just game to game? I mean, they've had more than their share of success in those situations too.
I think it's probably overdone a little bit, the concern, or like the rap on Gonzaga, but the reality is this team and this program and today is measured by what happens in March. This is a lot of fun and it's good to see them grow and kind of tell the story throughout the year. But you get to March and that's really what this is all going to be about. And I think this team's got the ability to be elite in that way. Um, I think the question that the season will answer is, can they get to a point where they're elite at that every time they're playing? And right now, there seems to be, look, this is as much continuity as Gonzaga has in relation to really any team they've had, but certainly in today's day and age of college basketball, this is still a team, it feels, that's still figuring out some things. Roles are still being defined. And I like to look at the rebounding numbers to get a sense night to night how a team's approaching things and both from a competition perspective, but also physicality. And this is a team in Gonzaga that's been out rebounded here a few times to start the year, early in the year. I'd like to, I'm hoping to see that now, hopefully over the next, 30 days or so, and certainly in the league play, because league play, they shouldn't have any real challenges on the glass. Can they put a run together where they're not only winning the rebounding battle, but putting a number on people? They rank, I think, 20th in the country in rebound margin, which is solid, but you shouldn't get out rebounded by West Virginia. West Virginia doesn't have elite size. They've got a couple athletes around the basket, but West Virginia is +6 on the glass, +9 on offensive rebounds.
Big
Now
deal.
that didn't hurt. That didn't hurt Gonzaga in that in the points column, at least on the stat sheet. Gonzaga was still +3 on second chance points. But what that does is that limits the amount of opportunity you have to get out and transition and score. Gonzaga only 9 points in transition against West Virginia. That's obviously an area where Gonzaga historically has really thrived, transitioning from the defensive glass into the open court, trying to find easy opportunities at the rim or open threes in transition. I think West Virginia's work on the offensive glass slowed Gonzaga down in transition. So even though, we look at the stat sheet, Gonzaga's a net +3 on second chance points, they're only getting 9 points in transition. That's where it hurts you. And so, this is, I think this team can guard just about anybody. I mean, a lot of these guys are going to make money after college. Small's going to get paid somewhere. He is a pro. I'm not convinced he's an NBA guy, but I've only watched him play once. With that being said, he's going to make a lot of money overseas. These guys are good. And I don't think in today's college basketball, really today's elite level basketball, it's about shutting a guy down. You're not shutting Small down where he's going to go 1 of 15. And if a guy does do that, it's because he's having a bad night. It's, can we make his life more difficult? And instead of, him going 9 of 18, is he 6 of 18? Does he miss 2 gimmies and an open, a contested 3 versus getting that extra wide open 3? So it's really about the margin, I think. It's the small details. And there's just sometimes some small breakdowns on switches or on rotations. I still maintain, I think Gonzaga's going to figure all of that out. But still early in the year. And I think there's some growing pains, and I think West Virginia is good. So when you're having those growing pains and you're playing against a good team, you're going to lose, or you can lose, and they certainly lost, and they had a chance. I mean, at the end of the day, they're up 5 with 25 seconds left, and they the game kind of slipped through their fingers. It almost felt like they thought they had it, and DeVries gets open, gets a really good look from 3. You have that, you can't get Nemhard back, and you have the turnover with Hickman. That's a tough spot to be in. He's straddling the half-court line. Ball's cross-court. I think he's worried about the 10-second violation, wants to get the ball over. DeVries is right there. And then you do this substitution with Nemhard, and you can't get it back on the floor. Now Caleb has the ball, and Caleb, I don't think is a start. He doesn't start the play. He's a finisher. And to put the ball in his hands, I think in hindsight, the staff may have liked to have seen Hickman with the ball there. But that's part of the growing process.
Exactly. And part of that growing process is there, and Mark Few mentioned it after the game for himself. He should have burned a timeout when they were struggling to get it over halftime or half court. All of them mentioned the guards got lost on switches against West Virginia, and that's where the 3 balls were coming, and that's where Small was getting to the rim or getting his buckets too, and DeVries. So those are obvious things that need to be worked on. And I think the bigger picture is those end of game situations against a quality opponent. If you don't have them, they had them against Arizona State, down the stretch, but nothing like this. I mean, this was tight. They were down late in the second half. It was get a stop or get a bucket, and they didn't do it. And so those kind of situations, you just have to go through them. And in a weird way, maybe the Zag Nation won't agree with me, but they need a couple more of those coming up. Kentucky, UCLA, whoever it is, St. Mary's, San Francisco, whatever it turns out to be, UConn, I'm sure will be like that. So you just can't replace those. You cannot. You have to have them, and you can't replace them. You can't do it in practice.
There's a muscle memory to having to perform under duress. If I'm not used to having to make decisions in a tight moment down the stretch of a game, when it's time to do that at the end of the year in the tournament, more than likely I'm not going to be as comfortable, and I'm probably not going to make the same play or have the same level of success. You're absolutely right. You have to have these tight moments, particularly given the league Gonzaga's in, and the gulf between them and everybody else is wider than I think it's been over the last few years. When you think about the losses St. Mary's has had with Mahaney, with Jefferson, they're not the same team. And you can tell me Santa Clara and San Francisco are good or better, fine. The gulf between Gonzaga and these other teams is wide enough where if they have a close game, we're going to be really surprised. So there's a good chance you starting December 30th, you're not going to have another opportunity. That's less than 30 days away. You're not going to have another opportunity to test out that muscle, those tense moments. So you're 100% right. You're not going to win all of them, but are we going to look back in a game in March where they're up 5 with 35 seconds left and they sealed the deal, and that team's going to look back on West Virginia and say, well, we learned something. That Mark's going to call that timeout, or they're going to get their substitutions right. Whatever it is, they're going to switch appropriately defensively. So I mean, I didn't have any heartburn after they lost. I mean, certainly you're disappointed, and you feel like you should have won the game. But that's a good West Virginia team that's going to probably surprise a lot of folks. Maybe not anymore, but going to catch a lot of folks in the Big 12 is what I'm guessing. And I don't think that's going to be a bad loss at the end of the year.
No, I don't think so either. And that's exactly why they schedule these kind of tournaments, these kind of one-off games at the Intuit Dome or at Madison Square. These are the situations, especially when it's neutral floor. Can't emphasize that enough. When you get in the NCAAs and you're not, close to home necessarily, that crowd is a different vibe than if you're playing at the Spokane Arena, and it more mimics, what you saw this weekend or what you're going to see probably in New York City. UConn's going to have the edge crowd-wise there. Can't replicate those situations, and you have to take advantage of them. Let's move on. Indiana, and it was old home week for a lot of Zags down there. Tommy Lloyd with Arizona, and Umar Ballo, the former Zag center. He spent a couple years with GU as a backup center here. Went on to Arizona, really blossomed, became an all Pac-12 player. Then ends up at Indiana this year. Talked to him about it and wrote about it, that it got played up as NIL driven and all those things. And look, there's money involved. Obviously, that's a factor. But he really stressed that the last 2 centers at Indiana, Kalel Ware and I think it's Trace Jackson Davis with the Warriors now, are both NBA guys and just improved by leaps and bounds with that staff. So that was his motivation. He is trying to get into the NBA after this season. So anyway, Umar had a huge day. He was unstoppable in the first half. I think he made all but one shot. He's making hook shots. He's posting guys deep. He hit a baseline shot that I went, wow, that is big time. Shooting free throws left-handed now.
I know.
That cracked Tommy Lloyd up. He said, man, what's going on there? But he had a huge half. I think he had 19. He finished with 25. Even with Umar going off on the Zags interior guys, the Zags had a stretch there that I thought was as good as they've had all year, including Baylor. Very similar to Baylor. A quality opponent. I think it was 21-2. Felt like it happened in an instant. It was every mistake Indiana made, boom, that transition game was going. It wasn't going against West Virginia. It was out and go against the Hoosiers. Shooting well, kickouts for threes, pick and roll with Nemhard was lethal again, but really shut them down defensively. And that's what usually accounts for these runs. When you can count on the offense most nights, when that defense clicks in 21-2, and that thing was over at that point. That's what I saw. What'd you see watching?
Well, I saw, as I was watching the game, I thought to myself, let's not declare things like Indiana's better than Baylor on the podcast. My God. I'm really surprised. I thought that Indiana has all the personnel to be a top 10, top 15 team, but they right now are searching for an identity. We can talk about it later if we've got the time, but it's fascinating to see what's happening at UConn, Arizona, Indiana, among several others, where I think the expectations for those programs going into the year are certainly very different to what's happening for them right now in real time. But Indiana just felt like a team with no identity, and I thought Gonzaga was just the better team throughout, and then they had that stretch where they were an elite level team, and they just put it out of reach. I was happy for Ballo. I think if you could have scripted it, you probably would have scripted it that way. Like, hey, I think everybody that knew Ballo here for the most part, I think had a good feeling for him, or good feelings for him, and we're happy that he had success at Arizona. And certainly, if he's going to go off, it's nice for him to go off in a game that you have in hand. And I'm happy for him. It's. I never had to do that when I transferred from Colorado. Gonzaga never ended up playing him down the road in my career, but I can imagine the nerves I would have felt in a game like that, and I was happy to see him perform well.
He did.
But I thought Ike again. I thought that the second foul was a bit of a cheap shot, but he certainly threw an elbow on the kid. The fact I forget who elbowed him in the back of the head.
Baco.
Yeah, but the fact he wasn't thrown out,
Baco, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I don't understand how you can elbow a guy in the back of the head and stay in the game, but that's not the point, I suppose. But good response from Ike. Still got logged 20 minutes, 14 points, 7 rebounds. I thought he was more decisive on his catches, deeper position, 6 of 8 from the field. It was Ryan's high turnover mark game of the year with 5, but still, 13 assists, and he had 5 steals. It's remarkable on the year. He's got 15 steals and 14 turnovers. Let's watch that all year long. I mean, are we going to get to a point where he's got however many assists, but on a net basis, he's either stealing, he's getting back all the turnovers that he's had, or he maybe even getting back more than the turnovers he's had. But I think we saw Ben have good moments, not necessarily shoot the ball, but good moments against West Virginia. His shot started falling against Indiana. His activity off the bench, and I think it was the best game Michael's had since he's been here.
It was.
He's not maybe had the impact that we would have thought, at least scoring the ball, but 15 points, 9 rebounds, 5 of those offensive. I thought he's always plays hard and he's always active, but it felt like he was rewarded in a way he hasn't been rewarded as consistently for that effort throughout the early parts of this year. But in that game, I thought he was everywhere, kind of kept things simple. So, yeah, I mean, it really wasn't the game I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be competitive just with Indiana's size, particularly there at the 3 and the 4 spot. Gonzaga just looked quicker and just had an identity. Moved the ball. The ball never stuck. It felt like with Indiana, the ball would just stay in a guy's hands too long. And I thought Gonzaga responded well. But to be fair, I mean, when's the last time Mark Few's teams lost a game and not responded well the following night? I mean, it just seems he's got a way to get them to deliver whatever message the loss needs to have, but to turn the page and get them ready for the next game, particularly in these tournaments. Even when they've lost, they've generally come back and won. And I thought it was a really good response from Gonzaga.
Yeah, and not only come back and win, but look like the Zags again. Really looked like the way they want to play. Nemhard controlling things, the transition, and pretty good defensively for most of that game. And I'm going to keep an eye on Indiana. That is going to be a science experiment to see how this all blends.
What's funny about them is they have so many guys coming back.
Yeah, they have nice returners as well. You're right.
And every guy they brought in, you're a lot like Gonzaga. You think fills a hole. We've got a proper center in Ballo. Their backup center would have started, or they would have gone small.
Yeah.
You bring in Rice, high level college point guard, and then Carlisle out of Stanford. It's like, hey, we've got these pieces fit with what we already have, but it just felt like a group that just was not connected at all. I'm just really surprised, and I'm with you. I think that's a good staff. They've got good players. You would hope they'd be able to figure it out, but certainly not the team I was expecting.
No, they've got a ways to go, and they were in the airport shortly after we got there early. We were supposed to fly at 9 a.m. and we were delayed a couple hours, and we saw Indiana come through the airport. I guess Tommy and those guys came through the airport too. I'm not sure. I thought I don't know, maybe they can't charter if it's an international tournament. I'm not sure, but they all did. And the Indiana guys looked, they were down on their luck a little bit. So they've got some soul searching to do. Last game of the tournament, Davidson. Not what Zag fans were expecting to see on Friday down in the Bahamas, but Davidson did their part. They knocked off Providence, really handled Providence, held them to 58 points. They did not do much holding against Gonzaga. The GU rolled it up pretty good, finished with 90. Mismatches inside throughout. Didn't matter if it was EK, Puff, Benny Gregg, Michael, Ajayi. I think they finished with 58 paint points. Again, That's not all posts. I think people get that misconstrued. That is, Nemhard getting to the rim and finishing, or KB's 3-point plays. He had a couple of those, I think. But just dominated inside, on the glass. Ben Gregg, terrific tournament. 24 in that game. We'll talk about him in a minute, but that was not two opinions. It was a great matchup for Gonzaga and not a good matchup for Davidson. That's how it played out.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's much to say here. I mean, the second, another look, the rebounding numbers, like I told you, that's the first thing I look at when I look at the stat sheet. Gonzaga plus 15 against Indiana, and then plus 17 against Davidson. A bit of a surprise against a big Indiana team, but not a surprise against Davidson. Just put a number on them on the glass. And 58 points in the paint, with 62 points in total coming from the front line, with 3 of those, Huff, EK, and Greg in double digits. I'm not sure how long we need to dwell on this game. Just obviously Davidson very far and away a mismatch for them. And, you're playing 3 games in 3 days. I think they left a lot out there the first couple nights and maybe didn't have as much in the gas as Gonzaga does. And, good teams, great teams, they take care of these types of opponents. And it looks like that. And that's what Gonzaga did.
Yeah. Well, we move on. Kentucky, Climate Pledge Arena, Saturday. This is the ongoing series that a couple more installments left to go. But Kentucky hires Mark Pope, the old BYU coach. Tried for a lot of guys and didn't come through with the initial guys on their list. But Mark Pope has done a nice job there. He kind of reconstructed the roster pretty quickly. Again, the transfer portal was big for them. They're off to a great start. I think they're still undefeated. I should look on where they're ranked. Did they move past the Zags? Give me a second. Maybe
Let's
I can find
see. No, that's out there. I just saw it. They are.
Yeah. I'll look it up. But
they're number 4.
Number 4. So there you go. They're ranked higher. They've got Lamont Butler, the kid at San Diego State that transferred. The point guard runs the show. He took San Diego State to the final a couple years ago. He brought Jackson Robinson from BYU, very athletic, nice wing. I think played at LSU to start with and is now back in the SEC. got an Oklahoma guard. Speaking of Oklahoma from the battle for Atlantis, they added guys. Well, one of the guys they lost is Kentucky's leading scorer, a 6'4" guard, Otega Oweh.
Ortega, yeah. Mm-hmm.
A real good shooter from Dayton, three-ball guy, Kobe Bryant. I think he's 25 of 41 on threes so far. So pretty good sample size. He's not just one of two every game. He's put them up. And Wake Forest post, Andrew Carr, nice player as well. They've got depth. They've got numbers. They play a lot of guys. And a lot of that's because they haven't been tested much outside of Duke. They did beat Duke down the stretch, made Cooper flag a couple of turnovers, bad shots, if I remember, and pulled that game out. Other than that, they've been kind of coasting a little bit. I don't think they'll be coasting for either team on Saturday. And I think these teams match up. Their depth, they have some shooting, both teams. I think size as well. This looks like a good matchup to me on paper, and I think Kentucky's going to be tough enough. Mark Pope knows the deal with Gonzaga, and vice versa. Mark Few with Pope style. They're going to present problems for each other Saturday, aren't they?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Jim. That Pope's very familiar with Gonzaga and what Gonzaga's like to do, and he had a lot of success. Early in his tenure, taking over that BYU program. If I remember correctly, some of those teams at the beginning of his run were awfully good. But they're playing Clemson. They being Kentucky play Clemson tomorrow. That'll be the second Power Four conference opponent they've played outside of Duke. Their schedule, let's just say, has not been designed to threaten their win-loss record. But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, effectively, every guy in the rotation is a new guy. And, when you've got that kind of turnover, it's not a bad idea to have quite a few cupcakes on the front end, particularly when you're in the SEC, which is one of the better leagues in the country, if not the best, certainly the second best, in my opinion. And give yourself some time to kind of gel and figure out what it is you have and how you want to play. They've got 6 guys in double digits scoring the ball, 10 players effectively play 10 minutes or more. They are deep. And Pope will play certainly 9 and may even dip into that 10th spot, depending on what's happening in the game. They're good defensively. It's hard when they've not really played anybody. It's a little hard to know how much to take from these numbers, but the numbers are what they are. I mean, they're 30th in field goal defense, 6th in three-point defense. They're really good on the glass, first defensive glass, ranked first in the country. They do a good job taking care of that backboard. Don't give you a lot of second chance, rather having given opponents a lot of second chance opportunities. And they've been really good with the ball, albeit against lower competition, but third in the country with a 2.1 assist to turnover ratio. So on paper, they look really good. They have a lot of depth. They have legitimate size. Carr's a really interesting player at 6'11", 235. He's a really skilled forward, shot 37% from 3 last year, 40% on this season, 63 overall, 18 assists to 6 turnovers. He's good. He can make a pass. He's comfortable with the ball on the perimeter. He will stretch Gonzaga's bigs out. He's more comfortable either shooting the 3 or attacking with a cut or with the drive than he is necessarily on the low block. You mentioned Ortega, just a lot of size there, 6'4", 215, can score. The Kobe break, the break kid, he's shooting 61% this year. He shot nearly 50% last year at Dayton. I mean, this is what he does, and he's 6'7". And he competes defensively. So I mean, you can go through the roster. I mean, Jackson Robinson probably had the biggest name of anybody that he brought in. With what Robinson did last year at BYU, it feels like he's still trying to figure out or adjusting to the new situation. His number, the ball, he's only 31% from 3. He's never been a great 3-point shooter per se, but certainly you expect more from him. He's an NBA prospect. He's their fourth leading scorer. I mean, they have real talent, real depth, real size. They will guard Gonzaga. They will be physical. This is not an opponent that I think Gonzaga is going to be able to necessarily out-muscle and kind of beat up. So I love the matchup. It's in Seattle. You'd expect it to feel like a more of a home environment for Gonzaga, which should hopefully create some level of an advantage. And this is going to be, let's call it the second real test Kentucky's seen for a bunch of new guys. Let's see how they do, in what's kind of a de facto road game. But I can't wait. I mean, it's certainly Kentucky's back. I mean,
It's big time.
yeah, it's a big time game. Kentucky's going to be good this year. I certainly don't want that to be the takeaway here that I'm not a believer. I just, want to see a little bit more. And, I think both teams play very differently. It's an interesting matchup that way. And it's going to be a great test for Ryan, as good as he's been with the ball, other than, the 5 turnovers, against Indiana. Kentucky can present real size on the ball. And Butler, he's only 6'2", which is larger than, he's taller than Ryan, but he's so just strong. It's going to be interesting to see how does Ryan hold up, because he's going to play 38 minutes, Ryan is. How is he going to hold up over the course of the whole game? If you remember last year, when he had to play those minutes every night, it felt like. And there were some games where he felt like he got worn down. Now, he hasn't had to do that this year, so I wouldn't necessarily expect that. But Kentucky's going to pressure him, be physical. And then, we could go on and on about the whole, every matchup, but this is a game. Graham Ike cannot have 2 fouls in the first 2 minutes. He cannot do that. They need him for 25 minutes, maybe even 28 against Kentucky, because Kentucky has real size. And as good as Huff has been, and he has been very good, he is not a rebounder. And you have to beat Kentucky on the glass. At minimum, you got to even it up on the glass. And if Ike's got those fouls early, that's a huge advantage for Kentucky, because I don't know if Gonzaga can keep them off the glass. I mean, he's not a vertical guy, but he just, when he anchors himself, anything in his area is his, and he carves out space for other guys. So, it doesn't take a rocket scientist here. I'm going to look to their 2 All-American caliber guys. I know Ryan's certainly having that kind of year. Graham, not necessarily, but I would put him at that level when he's right. Their 2 All-American level guys need to play like that on Saturday night.
Well, and you're like me. You probably watch Kentucky whenever you can, here and there. UConn, I've been watching, just because
oh my God,
they're playing. UCLA the same way. Mark Pope has certain things he does. When you watch them, they're talented, they're skilled, maybe more skilled than athletic even. I don't know if that's fair or not, but they look well coached is the bottom line. And both ends. They don't, guys don't run free, or wide open threes, those kind of things. And you saw that. I was going to say, Huff and Ike and Nemhard on that pick and roll last year in Rupp Arena for the last 12, 13 minutes was a bucket every time. Every time. They didn't even change plays. So you can count on that not probably being so easy this time around. Mark Pope knows that, and I think his system will cater to trying to stop that. But it is going to be a fascinating matchup. Foxy, let's hit on a couple of topics real quick, or at least one. Ben Gregg was sensational down there. I think he started out with 9 points, which he hadn't done since the Baylor game at the start of the year. Then he went to 13 or 14 for a season high against Indiana. Interesting, he was guarding Ballo, the guy he used to fight for minutes.
Yeah, I know.
And back and forth. They were both scoring on each other quite a bit. And then he just had a terrific game, 24 points. His 3 balls started to fall. Asked him about it. He felt like the weight of the world had lifted off him. You go 5-6 games without making a 3, and he's a 38% guy the last 2 years. So he has really come along. Braden Huff almost carried Gonzaga to a win against West Virginia. When their offensive weapons seemed to dry up, he was producing every time down, 6 or 8 points in the crunch time. So he's made a push, too, for more playing time. Are we at that point where Ben Gregg gets back into the starting lineup? I think the risk there is he just does so much coming off the bench with his energy and his rebounding and all the things he can do. And the same thing with Braden. Do you see him making any kind of change there, or are they getting enough time and making enough impact which they are, to be blunt, coming off the bench. You see any changes coming?
Yeah, I mean, you offered up this question ahead of the podcast. Look, 3 games, Greg's getting you 15 points, 5 rebounds, 61% from the field. Go ahead.
Let me say one thing first. We are far more concerned about this than the Zags are. I'll point
Oh,
that
yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
really don't belabor it. They more belabor who's in when the game's on the line. So this is more of a
Yeah,
fan thing and a media thing, I admit, but still a valid question. I mean, Benny is making a push here.
he is, and it's more a little starker. I mean, Ajayi was good, really good against Indiana, but last 5 games, including that, he's averaging less than 8 points a game. He's not shooting the ball well. I mean, even Ben's 2 of 14 on the season from three. Mike's 2 of 12 for the last 5 games, and he's an active rebounder, but he doesn't create a lot of playmaking. 5 assists, but he has 7 turnovers. So it's Greg is a starter. I mean, he started down the stretch last year. It's not as if you're thinking about starting the freshman big over somebody who doesn't have a track record or had put together 2 or 3 nice games, and now you're trying to totally readjust what you're doing. So you know to me, it's more about how are the pieces fitting when they're out there on the floor, and they clearly like Ike and Ajayi together. That's not to say that that you can't put any combination of the four together and you're not going to have a productive front line. Um, I like bringing Ben off the bench because A, he's accepted that as being okay. B, you're right; they really don't talk about that much. And as a player, if you're a real player and competitive, you want to be there at the end. The more mature you get, more perspective you have, you start to care a whole lot less about starting games. I just don't get any sense that Ben cares at all about that. Maybe I'm wrong. And then bringing him off the bench, you bring in a ton of experience, not just in college, but within your program. So when he comes in for Ajayi and is playing either with Huff or Ike, I'm bringing a guy in with over 100 games experience, let's call it, with my program, knows what we're trying to do, and he makes winning plays. And he doesn't necessarily need the ball. I just like we talked about balance of the rotation last year a lot and the lack of it, and how bringing Ben in the starting lineup seemed to create the best situation they could have created with the talent that they had. And now you brought Huff and Stromer off the bench. You brought a guard and a big. You could plug them into whatever spot you needed. Versus when they started the year, they had 2 bigs coming off the bench and no help in the backcourt. I think I'd leave it alone, but it's a question worth asking because I really like what Michael's done. I love how hard he plays, but he's not scoring the ball nearly to the level that you would have thought. And the inefficiency in which he played with last year offensively it's the same this year. Doesn't shoot a high percentage. His 3-point numbers are below where they should be. Shot 47% last year, granted on limited, about 2 a game. But around the basket, he's never been a high-end finisher, even though his numbers look great, and we're seeing that this year. I just don't know what benefit there is bringing him off the bench. I think there's something for him. If Graham can stay out of foul trouble and occupy as much territory and real estate around the basket as he does, and attention when he goes to score, I think that opens up the offensive glass or cutting for Michael in a way that it doesn't with either Huff. Huff's tremendous scoring the ball. If you think about Braden plays, so many of his post touches start out at 15 feet. And he'll back a guy down. Graham, most of his catches are at least 1 foot, if not 2 feet in the paint. Right? He just buries himself down there. I'm not sure. I don't know. It's a long way of me saying I wouldn't mess with it, and I don't know what you would do. But if you started Greg on Saturday, I would totally get it. But I've been saying this all year. It's my last point on this rambling answer. Keeping these guys happy and bought in is going to be the biggest challenge this staff has. Is the benefit or the upside to changing your starting lineup, does that outweigh any risk that you might have in rocking the boat and now losing Michael for a period of time as he takes that demotion to heart and takes it personally? And now you take a guy who's been starting but been ineffective scoring the ball, but giving you great effort. Now are you setting him? Are you taking maybe one step forward for the team, but Michael Ajayi's taking three steps back as a player? Is that worth it? I don't think it is. I'd leave it alone.
No, that's a great point. That's a great point. I don't see it changing yet. It might get to a point where it almost has to if it continues like this. But I really think Michael is just, a 3 for 5 3-pointer game away from kind of getting into his groove a little too and taking off, just like Benny did. He wasn't hitting the 3 ball and now he's taking off. I feel like when I watch Benny, their games aren't the same, but he's very much like Tilly to me. Same size. He gives them a calm, even though he's an emotional player. He calms them down. He doesn't make flagrant mistakes. He usually makes the right play. He can shoot it. Tilly could shoot it. I mean, they're not the same players, but he just he's a problem solver. I think that's the coaching staff use that for Tilly and Watson. He solves problems. I think Benny does that. And whether he's starting or off the bench, he does that at a very high level.
Yeah,
they're lucky he stayed and is doing that for him, because he could have probably made a pile of money somewhere else if he had left. But Benny's not that kind of kid. He is a Gonzaga kid through and through. He grew up around it.
Yeah,
he didn't want to do anything else. But I don't know. That's not probably a very good comparison. But
I think you're right. Killian was a better shot blocker. When he was healthy. But you're right, both kind of perimeter centric. Neither guy scored a ton with his back to the basket. Have a little bit of bounce to their game. In other words, they can put the ball on the deck. Really solid decision makers. Ben in 3 games had no turnovers. Shoot the ball well. I think Killian probably a little bit better athlete when he was right. But both could step out, switch on a smaller guy and keep him in front, compete. I think that's a really good comparison, Jim. Yep. I think both those guys play very similar. The thing I would say is they're both guys that the staff also doesn't have to nurture a whole lot. They're low maintenance, and I think when you've got a rotation of 8 guys, you really value the guys you don't have to water a whole lot. You don't have to give them a whole lot of love. They just buy in. They're easy. They want to play. They compete, and that's exactly what Ben does.
They're in the circle of trust, to use a Seinfeld reference. Tilly and Greg. Hey, that's going to do it for this week. We did go a little long-winded. That is not going to surprise longtime listeners. We do that. We had a lot to talk about. So anyway, I'll post this on our website, spokesman.com.
Give us a pass. Yeah.
We had a lot to talk about. I think we did just fine. It's also available on Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcast, Spotify. Come and check us out. We enjoy doing it. We bring it to you every Monday. Have a good week, everybody. We'll see you next Monday.